In this video, I'm going to show you how to make a fall themed gnome, but what's really special about this project is going to be that we're using the pass-through function in the Glowforge Aura. Now, unlike the other Glowforge models, it's a little more manual with the Glowforge Aura, but it can certainly be done if you know the right tips and tricks. So today I'm going to walk you through that. Now, first thing I always like to do is double check the thickness of my wood. So I've got that measurement now. And then, as you could see a moment ago, I opened the sides of the Glowforge Aura, and that's what you're going to need for the pass-through. So I'm just pushing it through one side. Basically, it doesn't really matter which side you push it through, other than you need to make sure that you've got more space on the right-hand side. All right, now next I'm going to select the file for this gnome. You'll have downloaded that from my website. You'll need to extract it until you get the SVG, then go to app.glowforge.com and select your SVG file, and this is what it's going to look like. On the left hand side, we've got pieces of your gnome. These are, the hat, the nose, the beard, the pumpkin, all those little pieces that we're going to put on top. The portion we need the pass-through for is on this right hand side here, basically the base of our gnome. And I've designed it so that it's bigger than 12 by 12, but if you don't want to use the pass-through, that's totally fine. Just shrink this down to fit on 12 by 12. Now you can see on the right-hand side there's no line, horizontal line across those two pieces. And that's what's key for making this a pass-through project. Basically, I've taken the base of the gnome and I've split it apart, but I've made sure that there's no cut line in between those two. So what we're going to do is we're going to essentially cut the top portion, and then we're going to slide the wood over inside the machine and cut the bottom portion without actually making a slice in between the two. Now, to get this set up correctly, we're going to actually need to put those two pieces together, and then we're going to rotate them so that we can put them on the board. So just move the other stuff to the side. We're not going to need that for now. And just a little tip, if you don't already know this, if it's not on essentially your mat or your working area, it's essentially going to be automatically ignored. So you don't need to go on the right-hand side there and select each of those and ignore. It's just going to automatically do that. So let's go back to the base, and we're going to pull that onto the screen, onto the working space. So let's select both. Sorry, it's taking me a second to select both. And I'm going to group them and then move them over and rotate them just so that for now I can get the lining up right. You want to make sure you're moving them together, because if you're like me, you like to preserve as much of the wood as you can. And so I want to push it as close to the edge as possible. But if I did that by just taking the top portion, I might not have enough space for the bottom portion of him because it's wider over there. So that's why I'm grouping them, just so I can get the placement correct, and then once we're good on that, we can ungroup it. So you can see I'm making sure that the top of the hat is as close to the edge as I can comfortably, and the bottom is as close to the edge as I can comfortably, making sure that, like, for example, his feet would not get cut off. Now I do like to leave just a little clearance because, it's not always perfect. All right, so we've ungrouped and pulled away the bottom part. So now that it's off essentially the cutting board, the working space, the cutting mat, whatever we want to call it, the working area, once we pull that off, it's not going to work it's not going to cut that part. All right, now those little rectangles that you see that I was just kind of pointing to a second ago, those 4 rectangles towards the middle, those are essentially registration marks. You can really call them whatever you want, but they're there to help us line up the two pieces in the next step. So those are important. They're just little pieces that are going to cut out. We don't really need those for the project, but we need them for helping us make the pass-through work. If you're familiar with doing layered, let's say vinyl projects, for example, in your Cricut or Silhouette or other things, you might be familiar with this process, having these registration marks. Those are really helpful when you're trying to line up multiple layers. That's a similar thing that we're going to be doing here. So after it cuts, we're going to make sure that it's lining up with those. All right, now all we need to do is find just the top portion of the hat. That's the only portion we're cutting out right now, and set that to cut. I'm using Baltic birch, so I've already got that setting, and I'm just going to set the thickness as well. And we're actually going to use set thickness and set focus on this. I do find that I get the best results if, for a pass-through project, if I set the thickness first, and then I go ahead and I do set focus during kind of the next step. So we are good to go here, and we're going to start printing the first portion of this. Let's go over to the machine and we'll print that, and then we'll be back in just a moment to work on the next part. All right, now the first part of our cut is done, and as you can see, we cut out the top portion, but there's no, in this case, vertical cut, fully cutting that piece out of the board, which is exactly what we wanted. Now you just need to coax the piece of wood through the machine until you've exposed part of your original cut and the rest of the board that you're going to need. And in this case, we're going to need all of it. So I'm just pushing it through until basically the entire remaining portion of the board is inside of the cutting area, and of course part of the original cut is also exposed. So we're good there. Let's head back to the machine and set up the second part of our cut. All right, now it's time to tackle what is the harder part here. So let's delete that first piece that we've already cut out and then drag that second one over. And what you want to do here is just line up those little registration marks, those rectangles, as best as you can between the image that's in the app and what you're seeing through the camera on the Glowforge on the piece we've actually cut into. Now you're going to want to click on those three dots and select Set Focus, and set focus on one of the sets of registration marks. That is going to trigger the focusing all over again, so just give that a second. If you look on the right hand side, you can see that little spinny thing saying focusing, so we just need to give that a second to do its thing. And then we're going to try to focus it, readjust it again once that's done. All right, now that that's done refocusing, you might want to shift it again just a little bit. You want to get those rectangles, the registration marks, as close as possible. And now I usually like to zoom in and just check it. So you can see those registration marks are lined up nicely, as is the line in the actual design in both spots. So I think we're looking pretty good here, which is awesome. And then from this point on, you're ready to set that piece to cut and then click print. Now, just a quick tip. Occasionally, after you click print and it runs through its usual calibration, you'll find that your image jumps a little bit. If that happens, click cancel and restart the aligning process before you actually print. But that didn't happen with us. As you can see here, it printed perfectly. Now, you'll notice that after I slid it out, it doesn't just kind of like fall away like it usually would. It is a nice clean cut, but there's usually just one or two little like fibers or whatever you would call it that are still connected in between those two cuts on the edges. So they're easy to just pop out and, you know, don't leave any bad edges at all. So that's just something to keep an eye out for. I think that's totally normal. That happens almost every time. Now we're just going to cut the rest of the pieces, as you can see here, and that's pretty straightforward if you've been using your aura. Now it's time to paint our pieces. This can be an interchangeable gnome, so keep that in mind as you're painting. I chose to do like black shoes and a white beard just so it's kind of neutral. And I'll show you in a second how we're going to be able to make it interchangeable. We're going to do it with these little magnet pieces. So rather than gluing all the pieces down, I'm going to use magnets to attach all the interchangeable pieces. So that's, in my case, going to be the hat, the hands, and the pumpkin. The little black circle that I put at the top of the hat and the shoes I have glued down so that those stay put, as well as the beard and the nose. But I wanted the pumpkin to be interchangeable, so that's why I'm putting the magnets where you see them here, and they're super easy to apply. And in a second, there we go. I'm just testing, make sure that it all holds nicely, which it does. So if you want to use this for other purposes, just change out the color of the hat or get rid of the pumpkin and maybe put a snowflake. You can do all sorts of really fun things with this. Hope you enjoyed it.